Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at the British Royal Armouries, taking a look at some of the particularly cool and esoteric Kalashnikovs in their extensive reference collection. And today, we're looking at an East German Wieger 942. This is an East German Kalashnikov in 5.56 caliber, which is a little bit unusual. Now, the development story of this goes back to 1981, and that is when East Germany purchases a license to manufacture the AK-74 and the 5.45 by 39 millimeter cartridge from the Soviet Union. This is not the sort of thing that the Soviet Union just offered for free. It was something that a country would have to pay for. And it's interesting that while a lot of countries licensed the AKM and original AK-47s, not so many actually decided to get into the production of the 5.45 guns. A lot of countries decided to go their own way. Now, in this case, East Germany had been exporting a lot of its 7.62 by 39 AKM production. Like as much as a third of East German guns were actually shipped outside of the country for export. And the Soviet Union had noticed this and recognized that East German exports were actually eating into the potential Soviet export market and kind of taking the opportunity to make some hard currency away from the Soviets. And when they licensed the 74 to East Germany, they didn't want that to happen again. And so the East German license specifically precluded sales on export. It was a license to produce for domestic military use only. Now, East Germany did tool up and make a significant number of AK-74s. There was a variety of them in different configurations that were used by the NVA, the East German Army. But they also still wanted that export money and export contracts. And so what they decided to do, starting in 1985, was develop essentially the 74 we have at home, chambered for the Western 5.56 NATO cartridge. The idea being there would potentially be a lot of export clients available for that gun, because that's, by 1988, well, 1985, that's kind of clearly the way things are going. So there were the first 4 pre-production prototypes were ready in 1988. This took several years to actually get processed through to fully develop. And the original plan was to actually have a whole family of Wieger 940 series rifles. So you had the 941, which was like a standard AKM or AK-74 with a fixed buttstock, the 942, which is this with a folding buttstock. There's a 943, which was a 12.6-inch barrel with a side folding stock. So that was sort of the PDW or submachine gun version akin to a Russian Krinkov. You had the 944, which was essentially an RPK, longer 20-inch or 19.8-inch barrel with a bipod, heavier barrel for supporting fire. And there was actually a 945 DMR rifle, long barrel with an optics mount for a scope. Interestingly, as a little tangent here, that 940 designation was sort of the Gerät device number assigned to this family of rifles. The original East German AKMs were the 910 series, the AK-74s were the 920s, and there were actually plans to expand this potentially into a series in 5.45, which would be the 950s, and a series of these in 7.62 by 39, which would be the 970 series. So 940 didn't just come out of nowhere. At any rate, the Berlin Wall fell in November of '89, and that put a significant kink in plans to produce and export a lot of military hardware. So before we talk about what actually happened with production of these guys, let's take a closer look at its specific features. Before we go farther, I will point out the receiver markings here, which are actually only trunnion markings. There's nothing else on the gun. 88 is the year of production, 1988, and then we have a 6-digit serial number with other parts marked with the last 3, so 471 there on the top cover. No other markings on the receiver to identify what it is. The selector markings are 1 for semi-auto and a little infinity symbol for full auto. Note also we have 471 here on the bolt carrier. The East German magazine is a 30-round capacity, pretty much standard, although 5.56 AK magazines are notoriously not interchangeable between patterns of guns, the way the 7.62 by 39 ones are. The East German, the Wieger mags, are distinctive for these 2 buttons, button-looking features on the bottom of the floor plate used to lock the floor plate in place. So that's your magazine. Starting from the front, we have a very M16-esque muzzle device there, basically an M16 birdcage, but with only 3 slots on the top. We have a hybrid front sight block and gas block. More typically, what you would find on an AK is the gas block here. This handguard is actually the same length as a standard AK handguard, but normally you would see a wood handguard here, or polymer perhaps, and then an exposed gas tube for the front section. The East Germans covered the whole thing with a solid plastic handguard. Anyway, normally the front sight block would be out here at the front end of the barrel. They combined the two together right there. The receiver area of the gun is pretty much standard, nothing really exotic here, typical AKM type receiver, ribbed reinforced top cover. The rear sight is standard, goes out to 10 or 1,000 meters. K is our point blank or a battle sight marking. The pistol grip is distinct to the Wieger series, and it does have a trapdoor in the bottom. So if I open that up, I have an oil bottle and a little cleaning and tool kit there. And the side folding stock is essentially the same as the side folding stock that the East Germans used on their AKMs and AK-74s. So we have a lever here, push that down, yeah, there we go, and you can fold that over to the side of the gun. Now, disassembly of the back end is super easy. That's total regular normal AK stuff. Top cover comes off, recoil spring comes out, bolt and carrier come out. Inside here we have typical AK fire control group, including a rate reducing mechanism there to keep the full auto rate of fire kind of reasonable. Where this is a bit non-standard in its disassembly is the front end. So to get the handguards off, instead of an upper and lower handguard, we actually have a left and right handguard here. There's a seam right along there, and on the bottom we have a unique front handguard retainer, and there's a big flat spring under this. So what we have to do to remove the handguard is pull this down. This is kind of like the AK handguard or AR handguard ring. We're going to pull this down and then pull out this retaining pin. You can see it goes all the way through right there. So there we go. That has popped out there. We can now slide that retainer forward and I can lift the handguard out. There's one side. And there is the other. Note that the underside of the gas block still has these hooks for retaining a cleaning rod, but normally those would be part of the front sight assembly out here. Also, there's no hole for a cleaning rod in this handguard retainer, and that is because the handguard is included as a 3-piece segmented rod held inside the handguards right there. That's kind of interesting. The downside is getting these handguards off is kind of a pain. Getting them back on is slightly more of a pain. And if you have to go through that process to actually get to your cleaning rod, I think it's really going to inhibit soldiers' interest in proactively cleaning their guns. Once we've got the handguards off, we're almost done. We just have a full-length gas tube here. So we're just going to pop this lever up, lift out the gas tube, and presto, you are done. The handguard retainer here cannot be removed without removing the gas and front sight block by tapping out its pins. So we're definitely not doing that. That's beyond the scope of standard field stripping. And for what it's worth, the way this actually locks in place is that center notch locks around that middle section of the gas block right there, and then locks into, oh man, there we go, locks into the opposite side of the handguard retainer right there. There you are. There is a field-stripped Wieger 942. That name, by the way, Wieger, comes from the name of the town where the factory was located that manufactured these in Weiss. As a side note, in the United States, there is actually a batch of these that was manufactured by InterOrdnance back 10 or 20 years ago under the name STG 2003C, Charlie. And those are guns that were actually made with reproduction East German furniture on Romanian guns. So the Cugir factory in Romania actually manufactured a pattern, a clone of the Wieger 941, the fixed stock version, specifically for US export for InterOrdnance. And like I said, they're reproduction furniture, but they're a reasonably close copy, and they actually use the original German magazines. So if you're in the United States, those guns, there weren't that many of them. I don't have an exact number, but there weren't that many, and they're a little bit hard to find now, but they're an interesting semi-automatic civilian available clone of what is otherwise a total unicorn of a military rifle. Several different countries took this route of developing their own version of essentially the high-velocity small-bore AK in 5.56 NATO for export, and most of them were unsuccessful. Most of them came too late and didn't really go anywhere. The Hungarian NGM MGV is a good example where they made only like 200 prototypes. The Czech CZ2000 series of guns made basically just prototypes. The Wieger actually did go into real serial production. So there are two contracts that I'm aware of. One of them was for 2,000 of the 942s, this exact pattern, sold to Peru. The other was a batch of 7,500 941s, that would be the fixed stock rifle version, that was sold to India. And I believe these sales came after the Berlin Wall came down. Information I was able to find says that the very last batch of the rifles was finally sold in 1992. So there was about a 3 or 4 year period where these guns were actually available and were being sold, albeit in very limited numbers. Ultimately, does the Wieger have any real impact on modern military affairs? Not really. You know, about 10,000 of them in total sold is not a huge number, but it's better than most of the other countries did with a 5.56 AK prior to the Soviet Union collapsing. So these are very scarce today. I'm not sure what happened to all the ones in Peru and India. I suspect they're pretty much still all there. We don't see them floating around very much. We don't see them in museums very much. So it was very cool of the British Royal Armouries to give me access to this one. As a note of their rarity, this is the only example they have. They don't have one of the fixed stock guns. Anyway, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.